evening, everybody, and welcome and thank you for coming this evening. My name is Nick Whitcomb. I'm the General Manager of Marketing and Membership at the Australian Institute of Management. While our title may have the word management in it, clearly management and leadership do go hand in hand. And if you actually look at the vision for the organisation, the vision is better leaders and better managers for a better society. And I think we'll all of us be highly aware of the importance of the relationship between the two of them. We are here for the launch this evening of the book Hardwired Humans, Successful Leadership Using Human Instincts. But first of all, it's with great pleasure I have a chance to introduce the lady this evening who will be officially launching this book. And it is with great honour and that I have a chance to welcome her to the stage now. Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Jane Goodall.
Let me start like I always do, because I think, here you all are standing. I can't even see some of you, even though I'm elevated, but I know you're all there. And I can see you, Mark, you're tall. But let me start off because I want to bring the voice of the chimpanzee into this room. It was the chimpanzee that inspired Andrew to do his book. It's the chimpanzee that's taught us so much about who we are. And if you came with me to Gombe and climbed the hills in the morning and listened, if you're lucky, you hear the chimpanzee greeting the day. Hello. And you can hear very much that sort of sound if you go to the Taronga Zoo and hear the chimpanzees there. To me, it's one of the most evocative sounds of the African forest. 50 years ago, indeed, I started studying the chimps of Gombe. That's half a century. We're still learning new things about them. And no wonder the chimpanzees, with their fascinating and complex social structure, have inspired people like Andrew to think about them in relation to human behavior. Nevertheless, chimpanzees, with their immensely social, complex structure, which we see in the wild, with their male dominance hierarchy, with a long-lasting, affectionate, supportive bonds between family members that can last through a life of up to 70 years. The fact that their non-vocal communication, kissing, embracing, holding hands, patting on the back, swaggering, shaking the fist, throwing rocks, they do these things in the same situation as we humans do them, and they clearly mean the same kind of thing. Andrew's book is focusing on understanding chimp behavior and how this can help those in business conduct their businesses, and he's going to be talking to you about that. There has, for most of the 50 years, been a very clear-cut hierarchy with a number 1 male, an alpha, number 2, 3, 4, and so forth. It's when there is no clear-cut top-ranking male that we find chaos among the subordinates, because as soon as there is no clear-cut alpha male, there is an immediate disorganization among the others, each of whom is now wanting to seize this opportunity to try and reach a high rank himself. And it's very, very clear after the 50 years that when there is a well-ordered dominance hierarchy, there is peace within the society. It's also very clear that those males who do make it to the top do so in different ways and lead or carry out their duties as top-ranking male in very different ways. And the kind of alpha male who is in power has a great deal to do with how the rest of the community behaves. It also has a great deal to do with how long he may be expected to reign as a top-ranking male. And one of the most important behaviors in the male hierarchy, so important in forming and maintaining alliances, is social grooming. And social grooming, Andrew will be talking about, and he's equating it in our human society with gossip, and he'll explain about that. And I think that Andrew's book, which we're launching today, taking some understanding of chimpanzee behavior and using it to try and find out what it is that's innate in our own human behavior. And we've come such a long way since I first went to Cambridge University and was told that there was a difference in kind between humans and the rest of the animal kingdom. I think today we realize it's a difference in degree. And I think that what we've learned about chimpanzees from the Gombe study, from the studies in captivity, and from other studies both in the wild and in zoos around the world, make Andrew's book a great deal more acceptable to people in general than if he'd written it 50 years ago, when we knew so little about chimpanzee behavior and was so arrogant in our assumption that we were so completely different from our closest living relatives in the animal kingdom. So, Andrew, it's your book and your turn to take the podium. And I'm very grateful that I have this opportunity to share the platform with you on this very special evening.
Thanks very much for the introduction, and also for AIM to support the launch of this book into the universe. And Dr. Jane, thank you so much for the honour, the privilege of you making time these few weeks when you're in Australia to launch my book, and also having contributed a note as the introduction to the book. Dr. Jane is the most, as you would know, the most gracious, wonderful being, and I'm sure we all feel privileged that she's made time for us tonight. And thank you everybody for sharing this event, and to be the launch of the message of the book, moving out into the world, and particularly the business world. And my message is that out of the long journey of human history, 200,000 years ago, Homo sapiens are said to emerge on the plains of Africa. Out of that time, it's only been the last 250 years that we've moved from being hunter-gatherer and villagers to change our habitat to come and work in offices and factories. Behaviour that served us well on the savannah plains is alive and well in today's offices, factories, corridors and meeting rooms. So what are these instincts that we brought out of the savannah? How do they present themselves at work? And that's pretty handy for sense making. And then most excitingly and most productively and positively, we can then do some very useful things about that, both for our own personal effectiveness as leaders and as HR professionals, and in designing and building constructive organisations. So the structure of the book is a chapter on each instinct. The nine instincts come from my second hero, Dr. Jane, Professor Nigel Nicholson at London Business School, who works in evolutionary psychology, and I'll come in a moment to the eureka moment I had 13 years, 6 months, 2 days and 8 hours ago. I'll come to that explanation and that sense making for me. So the book's structured around a chapter for each instinct, weaving in a revealing chimp story, and then thirdly, explaining the implications for leaders. So let's take an example, and so Dr. Jane mentioned gossip as in grooming, and there's two reasons why we gossip. I should first of all define gossip. Gossip is social chit-chat. The normal office discussion we might kick off with something like, Chris, have you got time for a coffee? Or Bruce, you wouldn't believe what the boss has just said. Or you won't believe that what I just heard at this meeting. That's social chit-chat. And that leads us to the first reason why we gossip and why it would have served us well 50, 100,000 years ago. It was very handy when our ancestors had that ability to share, gather, trade information. It would have been very handy for our ancestors struggling on this harsh climate of the savannah to find out where the food sources were. Where were the predators last seen, let alone the warring tribes, some of whom were in actually our clan. So the first reason why we gossip and share information is actually it's a very practical and useful way to find out what's going on. Why wouldn't we be attuned to gossip and innuendo and knowing what I need to know to serve me well? The second reason, less well known but shared with us just a moment ago by Dr. Jane, is it's our method of forming and maintaining alliances. So similar as in what I've learnt about the chimp world is the grooming, the reciprocity, the bond making, the settlement of conflicts, the reassurance, the formation of alliances. We just do it by our enhanced vocal capability. At that point, I might weave in a chimpanzee story, and I'll come in a moment to the wonderful experiences, and I know many in the room have had this at Taronga or Nicole at Melbourne Zoo with the gorilla keeper in Melbourne. So Louise or Alan, I'll talk a moment about them a bit more, but they might share a story about two of the females at Taronga Zoo, Sasha and Sheba, who up until fairly recently were not friends at all. That is, and keepers will monitor who's grooming whom. Sasha and Sheba were rarely, if ever, seen grooming each other. They just appeared not to be friends, and that's okay. Until they both had a baby at roughly the same time. They were forever seen hanging out together, grooming while the kids played. And then in the book, I will then explain in the gossip chapter 12 implications of this instinct. And the point really about the knowledge of instincts, once we bring this into consciousness, is this doing useful things because we can then lead more productively and consciously in applying the knowledge. So one, for instance, with gossip would be to use the gossip test. So as a leader, and for HR professionals and trainers who teach leaders, leaders will know that people will talk about you. The question is, what do you want people to say? You meet someone for the first time in a recruiting process, or it's their first day of the job, or you've just done an appraisal of an individual, you've just had a team meeting, you've run into someone in the corridor, you're a senior executive in the lift. What do you want the person to say later, if not that night? So you know in the recruiting process. As an example, the prospective new hire will go home that night, walk in the front door, and we all know the goss. Darling, how did the interview go? Or, darling, I met the company today. And then the point to leaders is, whatever you want the person to say, you have overwhelmingly influenced, for good or bad, what that narrative or story is. And through the book, what a thrill to be able to share that with you, and to share it as a body of knowledge, as my contribution to what I've learnt and studied. And once again, thank you to Dr. Jane. Like many of us at roughly my age, our family was a National Geographic family. And so I grew up. So I remember as a kid, primary school, Broken Hill, at the dining room table of the house on the mining lease where we lived, I remember reading the National Geographic and reading about Jane Goodall. And I remember that sense of awe, like I can't claim to remember what I read, but I do carry with me that emotion, that awe of the work that Jane Goodall was doing in this distant place of Africa. And also I have this sense, I don't know whether in later years it's sort of making it up with the licence of years, but this awe of the significance of her discoveries. And these pictures of Dr. Goodall and these amazing chimps. And so it's a very exciting dimension of my life journey that kid in Broken Hill, in what we affectionately known as Cottage 7, all these years later through this life journey of then both sharing this information about chimps and in particular for tonight, how it's informed leaders in organisations and your wonderful generosity and spirit in launching my book. Thank you so much. I'm told that's what chimps do too when they haven't seen each other for a while.